You are listening to the FORSCOM Frontline, bringing you to our soldiers on the front lines of readiness. Hey everyone, welcome to the FORSCOM Frontline. I'm Ashley and I'm your host. Today we are starting a brand new season of the Frontline, and I am lucky enough to have our Public Affairs Sergeant Major Randy Randolph here to help me out. So welcome back to the podcast. This is your second time guest hosting.
It is, and thank you. Happy to be here and have this discussion with Sergeant Major Holland.
Yeah, so like you said, to kick off this season, our first guest is the top enlisted soldier in FORSCOM, Command Sergeant Major T.J. Holland. I always mess up your name, Sergeant Major.
It's the easiest one.
I know. my tongue and whatever. Every time. So T.J. Holland, our FORSCOM Command Sergeant Major. So welcome. Thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to do this. I know you wanted to do this, and we've been trying to get you on for a little while, so I'm happy we were finally able to make it happen.
No, absolutely. I'm pretty excited about it. You know, I was just down the road for a little while, and now I find myself up here on the greater FORSCOM team. So honored to be in here. And Sergeant Major Randolph's here because we deferred his next assignment a little bit longer because his backfill won't make it here quickly enough. So glad that he's still on our team as well.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Sergeant Major. And Sergeant Major, let's get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
So if I do my math right, you're coming up on 30 years of service this year.
Combined, a lot of people don't know, but I was a National Guardsman once upon a time.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And during that time, you've been to Europe, you've been to Hawaii. You have deployments that include Joint Task Force Liberia, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Resolute Support, and multiple no-notice crisis responses for the immediate response force. So really, there's no area throughout your career that you haven't covered. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, throughout all your experiences, what are some of the biggest things that you think you bring to the table as the senior enlisted for FORSCOM?
You kind of said it a little bit there, experience. I started my career right here on Fort Liberty, and then I've been lucky enough to still be here at the kind of twilight, if you would say, since you're kind of putting numbers out there for me and aging me, of my career. So, you know, I started off as a paratrooper in 82nd, living in the barracks. I've lived in the barracks from E1 to E5. I've got, like you mentioned, multiple assignments to Europe, both in Italy and Germany. I've been stationed in Hawaii. I've been deployed to CENTCOM. No notice several times, as you alluded to, as the 18th Airborne Corps Sergeant Major in the Immediate Response Force. So whether it's me personally or my spouse and my children, you know, I bring a wealth of experience of, you know, the operational tempo of what it is to be a paratrooper, my experience in the 4th Infantry Division, seeing the impacts of the tempo on our armor formations, our striker formations. There's insatiable desire for Forces Command soldiers across our ward. And there's no better way, in experience-wise, is being ready to fight tonight.
Sure.
You know, that's the number one thing when you think about it, and coincidentally aligns with the Chiefs' number one thing and who we are as warfighters.
Absolutely. So, you know, one of the things you didn't mention that you've done is you were over at the Golden Knights. And I just found this out last week, which is pretty awesome. And you were the Sergeant Major over there, right?
I was. You know, I was at the Sergeant Major Academy and then came out after graduation, the command selection list, and it said United States Army Parachute Team. And I said, what's this? Because it didn't say Golden Knights, so I'm like, I got to do some research. I'm like, Golden Knights, how's that possible? I'm not a free fall guy. But then I went and showed up and got thrown in the auxiliary free fall program. I think it was a really good spot for me to show up because majority of my career has been in Forces Command or warfighting formation, minus a brief tenure as a Ranger instructor in a Mountain Phase Ranger School, which is Ranger School. But the parachute team taught me a lot of great things. You know, I got to interact with our Army senior leaders, members of the Joint Force. I got to interact with national celebrities, regional celebrities. You know, the tandem team does great things over there. I mean, they're called the Golden Knights because they've been golden medals ever since their inception.
Right.
That's when I found out they had a close relationship with several former presidents that loved the skydive, and some to this day. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it was threw me in the media relations lens like I had never had any experience from that
That's
before.
what you said.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to pull on is you talked about op tempo and family, and you have a young family.
I do.
So I think you bring a lot of experience of having a family and going through those deployments and the effect that has on soldiers and the families overall. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. But so you are right after 90 days or so. And so I'm just curious, what have your observations been so far as the FORSCOM Sergeant Major?
The boss asked me that too. It was funny too because the Commander's Initiative group, before Sergeant Major Sims and I switched out, they sat down with me. He's like, "Hey, Sergeant Major, it's not no better time than before you go in position start thinking about an assessment." It's like, well, I'm not a commander. I don't feel comfortable assessing other commanders. But as a Sergeant Major, as a senior enlisted leader, responsibility is to give commander feedback. And I think that's what's been important for my relationship with my commanders throughout my career. And coincidentally, it's perfectly aligned 90 days with going home on a little bit of holiday leave, get the time to do some reflection as FORSCOM's top NCO, and then kind of look at the commander's readiness guidance because he kind of did an in-stride assessment on there. And there was a couple things that, relationship as far as across other leaders in Forces Command and what we're doing right now as we're kind of transforming in contact. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this started back with General Garrett when we had this gated training strategy, which preceded him back when General Milley was the FORSCOM Sergeant Major. And we decided, hey, we're going to go ahead and try to really objectively measure readiness. We're going to start at the lowest level. We're going to do a training exercise. We're going to do a live fire exercise, and it's going to culminate at our capstone, which is the Combat Training Center, both national and joint readiness training centers. Well, that kind of put us in a very hard time constraint because there was still a CENTCOM fight going on. Indo-Pacific was becoming a big draw because our pacing threat, our competitor out there in that region, Europe, is kind of balancing act with reassuring the allies and partners we have over there. So the tempo was still going on, so it was really hard to build readiness at a time and threshold fast enough to make sure families had a time to kind of be families before we kind of throw a brigade forward and come back. Kind of like the old R4 gen, right? You knew when you came home 11 months later you were going on leave before you deployed again, kind of mindset. Exactly. And then that was it was too much of a burden really on our commanders and in really our training apparatus. So General Garrett, rightly so, saw a deficit mostly at our platoon and squad level. He said, hey, let's slow it down. Let's get more reps and sets. Let's migrate to this foundational training strategy. Yeah. So we really focused, what the commander kind of talks about winning the first fight, right? Mm-hmm. And that starts with the smallest echelon possible, and that's our squads, platoons that are out there. So we focused that. We got really good. We had all these lessons learned at Combat Training Center. We were revisiting, and then we started kind of turning those back. We got back into multi-domain operations, and we saw some really huge success out there. And then when General Pappas came on board, he's like, hey, we're really good at that, but our battalions and brigades are kind of missing that higher level collective proficiency as far as synchronizing all those warfighting elements at that level. And he said, I want to get to this multi-echelon brigade and below training strategy. We're not going to leave away the lethality we've built at platoons and squads, but I want to get to higher level collective proficiency, even get the division in the dirt, right? Where the divisions are now starting to rotate out there. And our first big one, First ID did it before. They were the first one kind of piloted it, but First Armor Division is about to start up here next month. Yep. Now, what I've seen is, hey, we rightfully so, we have to get there because we're going to, in accordance with FM 3-0, the division is going to be the new principal warfighting headquarters. Yeah. And we're going to new R-struct once it's finalized, hand slapped on the table, and then we can go out and we can start transforming in contact. We're going to pull some capability up at the division, and we got to figure out, not really figure out, we have to actually employ that readiness appropriately while we're stressed in a warfighter, division in the dirt, or the CTC.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, coincidentally, in our policy 600-20 and in our training manual, 7-0, non-commissioned officers are responsible for individual crew, team, squad training. So there's no reason we should degrade our squad and platoon level proficiency because we have NCOs as trainers, principal trainers for those formations out there. So commanders continue to drive collective excellence at the battalion, brigade, and higher. And NCOs, we just do what we were built to do, and what other nations try to emulate just can't replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Being a primary trainer down there. So I think that's one big one. I mentioned division in the dirt. I think that's huge because we said in our doctrine the division is the principal warfighting headquarters, but then we actually have to do it. We have to stress it, right? So some of this is we're going to task organize to what we think the future R-Struck is going to be. We got to put that out there in the dirt, and we got to test it, and did we get it right?
Sure.
Before we actually do it, and we want to learn from these lessons we observe and inform the Army and make sure our doctrine is moving with the speed of relevance of how we fight. It's one thing to draw it on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard, but we actually have to have commanders with their NCOs and their soldiers out there actually doing what we say they can do. That's huge. Our support to Capstone, the relationship between the Futures Command and Forces Command is super important because you hear the chief and the secretary say transform in contact. And now I know we have a discussion on it later. We have a responsibility because all requirements starting in with a soldier, not just any soldier, a FORSCOM warfighter.
Right.
Because that's the one we're going to put this thing in their hands, and they have to employ it in large-scale combat operations.
Sure, yep.
Right? So if we don't get the soldier with the scientist in the dirt to stress that piece of kit, I always like to say if you want to find out something works, put it in the hands of a paratrooper, they're going to break it.
Right.
And that just kind of proved to it. Because 2030 is now, right? We have to start testing those competencies, those gaps those warfighting gaps that we're identifying. We have to start kind of developing some solutions, and we got to start testing things now. The structure, the future Army structure, there's going to be some tough decisions to be made. I know there's some things have been communicated to our 19 Deltas and our 19 Kilos, the creation of a 19 Charlie MOS and some other things. There's some uncertainty out there with the engineers and MPs. No decision has been formally made just yet, but there's a plan. And Forces Command has got to take a hard look at that plan, and we've put our vote in. And I think we're happy with the future way of things going, and I think there's a plan for everybody in the Army, soldier, civilian, family member, as far as what that's going to look like. Bottom line is, there's a relevancy to what we have to do. We have to transform. We've seen the lessons observed, what happened with the Ukraine and Russian conflict, what's going on in Indo-Pacific. The new capabilities are being developed. We've seen other things that happen in CENTCOM. We have to transform, right? Whether it's new MOSs, whether it's new equipment, it's got to happen. And then one key salient point that the commander mentioned is manning is our number one most significant FY23 concern. Well, it's FY24, and it still is. Right, we have an accessions challenge, but we have soldiers in Forces Command right now, and we got to make sure those soldiers are ready, they're available, they're deployable, and are lethal. So we have to work on that with what we have.
Right.
No, absolutely. And what's interesting is you talk about transforming, and you talked earlier about how a young paratrooper being here on Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, and you're in the barracks, and what you saw. Being that young paratrooper to what you saw now, you've seen a lot of changes throughout the Army. You've seen inclusion to some of our MOSs and a lot of other things. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and where we are now and why that's important, some of those transformations?
No, absolutely. I mean, I've seen it ebb and flow, right? I mean, I remember being 11 Bravo and looking around, and we had 11 hotels, 11 Mikes. We still have 11 Charlies, and we consolidated CMF 11 into 11 Bravo and 11 Charlie, right? We pulled in Mikes and hotels. 68s, they've broken out to different, whether you're whiskeys, Charlies, and then we consolidated again, and the ASI determines who you are kind of stuff. So we've seen that kind of ebb and flow. Signaleers, 2 years ago there were 17 MOSs. Now we're down to 11, right? When you have too much specificity and you don't have enough people, and then you're in a very special MOS, and we're having a sessions challenge, and we don't have enough people in that special MOS to do what we need them to do, that impacts what? Your readiness, right? I'll give you an example. If I don't have a warrant officer that's responsible for maintaining a high or exquisite piece of kit, call it something on our G2 that looks at things, finds things for our targeteers to target and then levy munitions against.
Right.
If I don't have that exquisite skill to fix that nice piece of kit, then the commander can't do what we need to do in time and space.
Yeah.
Make more decisions faster than the adversary. So we have to have that person, but more importantly, I think what we found is maybe we don't have to be super niche special, right? Especially like I just mentioned our signaleers. Some of them can actually do more. We've asked them to do more, and they've proven we can do more. Imagine that. Our soldiers are really talented. We just got to give them the opportunity to show it to us, right? I would tell you the MOS certification and expert badges have been super huge. The MI training strategy, the foundry we brought in for our intel folks, the medical CEUs over time for our medics, the E3B, we developed the expert soldier badge, to complement the expert infantry badge and the expert field medical badge. And I think that's super important. That's inclusion, and it really makes you better at what you do.
Sure.
You get a chance to prove I am an expert. Yeah. Our doctrine, I've seen it move at the speed of relevancy now to where it's actually consistent with how we're fighting on the ground. At one point, FM 6-22, which is our leadership manual, talked about some really cool leadership competencies and leadership attributes and all these other, but they weren't consistent with our counseling enhancement tool,
right,
our non-commissioned officer and officer and evaluation forms, our assessments. So now they're all synchronous. Right, they say the same terminology. It's amazing, right? It's feedback, and then I would tell you that I've seen the Army get biased towards action and okay with failing fast, because it's okay to fail back here in the garrison to try to get something right, or actually in one of our combat training centers to experiment, our capstone, because we don't want to fail on the battlefield. So I've seen that with both our structure, our policy, and also our doctrine, and I think it's making our Army a lot better.
What do you think, that young paratrooper that sees some of these changes, how do you think that would have changed you or your leadership approach when you were a younger troop, these changes that have been implemented today?
Boy, when I was a young paratrooper, I didn't even make eye contact with my platoon sergeant, right? Now we encourage our young soldiers to communicate with our leaders about, hey, you have a special skill that you just can't see on an assessment,
right,
or on your talent management profile. I just left the 18th Airborne Corps. One thing the Futures Command is trying to figure out with their software lab is we have people out there that understand coding as a language.
Right.
There's no MOS for that. There's no additional skill identifier for that.
Such a gap.
I know it's huge, and we have soldiers. I mean, I've seen young soldiers that were mechanics.
Right.
Food service professionals, HR professionals that do this stuff on the weekends, have master's degrees in this stuff.
That are expert at it now.
That's right. Yeah. And we've seen them in many of my 6 no-notice deployments do things on the edge that's made our Army better. Like a tactical solution, we've been able to pass off the Futures Command to scale up and out across the Army.
Sure.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
That was not available to Private Holland.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I was an infantryman. It's like, what are you talking about? Get better at shooting your M203 grenade launcher. Right? So I think that would have probably motivated me a heck of a lot better. I was already all in. I come from a family of service. But I would tell you that would have been fantastic to know that, like, hey, someone actually is paying more attention what I got to say, too.
Right.
Because I actually have a better, not a better, but I'm a better version of myself because I have a cool skill that nobody else has.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm just going to interrupt here for a second and say that I fired an M203. When I started public affairs, I was at Fort Jackson for my internship.
Yeah.
And I took, media person or somebody out to one of the ranges, and they had asked him if he wanted to fire it. And he said no. And I was like, well, I'll do it. And so, I had like high heels on and a pink trench coat, but I know.
How'd it
but
go?
I don't know where it went. But it went that way.
Yeah.
Downrange.
Hey,
It did.
Within the range band.
Yeah, at least it went that way, right?
Right. So we talked about this a little bit about war fighting and really FORSCOM, that being what we do and our soldiers train to do every day. But can you talk about how our soldiers in particular are working to be brilliant at the basics? Because this is a new term that, we talked to the SMA about it when he was here, and I struggled to get the words out, brilliant at the basics. I don't know why.
Alliteration.
But, But can you just talk about that from the FORSCOM perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of another way to say master the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
And I would tell you that this is something that we, as a new FORSCOM Sergeant Major, and then we got some other new ACOM Sergeant Major out there with Sergeant Major Harris, new TRADOC Sergeant Major, and we went into this. The AUSA is like, hey, what's going to kind of like be some of our top line focus areas as we went into the SMA's non-commissioned officer professional development panel, and warfighting is number one, right? And regardless of who you are and where you serve, you still have to master the fundamentals of what you do every day. You still have to be brilliant at the basics. Yeah. So I kind of hit on the migration from the gated to the foundational to the multi-echelon brigade and below kind of stuff. But really, when you nest brilliant in the basics into the commander's 4 wins, General Pops' 4 wins. Really, it's our 4 wins, the Forces Command. It's everybody's. Yeah. I'm not going to talk them in necessary order because I'm just going to talk in the order of relevancy since we said brilliant at the basics. It starts with winning the first fight, I think, right? It's winning at the point of contact. We say make contact the smallest echelon possible in the infantry manual, because I'm an infantryman in soul and heart, even though my MOS is no longer 11, it's now 00.
Yeah.
It's still there. I can recertify if everybody needs me to. But that young sergeant, that young PFC specialist private that's down there in that fire team, in order for them to be fight, win, survive, and thrive on the battlefield in large-scale combat operations, they have to be masters of a couple things, right? Their individual weapon system, shoot, their movement and maneuver, because we're a maneuver army. That's what makes us special.
Right.
Communicate, right? And we'll talk about more about, I'm sure I've kind of I got a cheat card ahead when I'll be asked a little bit, right? So, and I'm sure there's a surprise out there. But like what makes a good leader is communication. And in brilliance, we have to have non-commissioned officers and warrant officers that train and certify. It's part of our 8-step training model, right? Yeah. And I talked about NCOs, the primary trainer, consistent with our doctrine and our policy. But that commonality between sergeant to command sergeant major, right? We're all important. We have one thing in common. We're all sergeants. Strip off the other qualifiers, staff, first class, master first, command sergeant major, whatever. We're all sergeants. So what does that mean, right? We're responsible for training and enforcing standards and discipline, right? And if we do that and we drill and we're master fundamentals, we become brilliant in the basics, we're always going to win that first point of contact, right? Win that first fight. Now, the future fight, as far as that building that mastery in our fundamentals, is we have to validate that some way, right? We do that through our live fires. Right, and it's one thing to go out there and we're drilling. We go through our EIB, ESB, EF&B at our E3B sites. We do our MI training strategy. We get our med-CUs. We go the Mystic. We certify. We do all those great things at Table 8. Artillerymen, do theirs on their gunnery tables. Our tank crews. All those things say, hey, there's a standard by which we measure you, whether right. It's kind of like a rifleman on a range, right? Are you an expert? Mm-hmm. Right, or are you a sharpshooter? Where are you? We get that live fire, but that's great. It's good practice, but we have to do things at night, right? If you look at some of the lessons learned or some of the things that we've observed and out there, when the lights go out, we own the night. We have to do all those things that we do at day, the mastery of the fundamentals, but we have to employ and do that and be lethal and dominate at night. Makes some people scary. It right. should. Anybody who's not an American soldier, an American citizen, should be scared of the capability and then of what our Army can do when called upon as to. That's our moral responsibility between us and the American public.
Absolutely.
Right? We have to win as a total balanced Army, right? Our doctrine is compo agnostic. It doesn't matter if you're an active soldier, National Guardsman, or reservist. Doesn't say that on U.S. Army,
right.
It is who it is, right? You're an American soldier on the front line, serving with distinction. You have to be a master, brilliant at the basics. Yeah. When they see you, they're going to look at you. They don't care, right? No one else cares. I don't care,
right?
You're a soldier.
You look at the rank,
yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, I kind of look at like, okay, I see who you are, or you're non-commissioned officer, warrant officer, young soldier, and I'm like, okay, do you have a shoulder sleeve insignia? Where you come from?
Right.
Right? Because then I'm like, okay, are you armored crew member? Are you an aviator? Because then I want to know more about you, where you've served. Do you have a combat shoulder sleeve insignia? Yes or no? Doesn't matter if you do or don't. But more importantly, it's like, where have you served? What's your background? What's your base? Because, what's great about, moving up from out of a brigade to a division to a corps, and now the FORSCOM Sergeant Major is, I'm not supposed to be just very compartmentalized or very have a lot of just experience and wisdom in being an infantryman. I have to be a mile wide and more than an inch deep on this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So part of that's giving honest, candid feedback and help mentor young soldiers regardless, because in the end, I expect you to be the best version of yourself based off interaction. So I kind of mentioned, that aspect of it. The other part is we have to win trust and empower leaders. If you look at 3-0, it says leadership is the most decisive element of combat power. Right? And leadership doesn't just show up with bars, stars, leafs, or chevrons.
Sure.
Right? Because there's informal leadership as well.
Yeah.
Right? And what makes our Army so great is disciplined initiative. Paratroopers in Normandy creating havoc and making Germans think more have arrived than what is there, because they know the commander's intent, they know their mission, they know the missions of their brothers and sisters left, right, forward, and rear, and they're just moving out and they're executing, right? That's what makes us kind of special. You have to trust people to do that, right? You have to be brilliant at the basics to go band together with a paratrooper from the 82nd, 101st, just because you met up on some random drop zone in the dead of night in Normandy, and move out. First, know where you're at, and then move out to an objective, right? And then we have this great thing called NCO Corps. All right, we've been doing this for a few hundred years, so I'm kind of a little bit biased. I think we're better than everybody else's NCO Corps. And I already mentioned it's always been tried to be replicated, but not ever duplicated.
Right.
Our NCOs are great because our commanders empower us. And the only reason they empower us because we've earned their trust, right? Because we're brilliant at the basics and we can impart that wisdom and we can drill and we can hold people accountable. But that trust is earned every day by our NCOs, right?
Absolutely.
And everyday selection, meaning you got to show up, suit up, kit up, and do your best 110% every day.
Yeah. So we're going to run out of time, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But we're going to get to a couple more questions
Sure.
before we do. So we talked about this briefly before I brought it up, and we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but families. Families are a huge part of our soldiers' readiness, and our families have to be ready too. So what is your message to FORSCOM leaders, NCOs, about being engaged and emphasizing that family readiness is so important so that our soldiers can effectively accomplish their mission?
Sure. Really communicate, right?
That's
my wife would tell you.
Yeah.
My wife would tell you. My kids would tell you. They just want to know when I'm going somewhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially in immediate response force, contingency response force, you're in a prepare to deploy order. You might not know where that's going to be.
Yeah.
But the last thing you want to be able to do is dead night, like, hey, spouse, I think I might be going somewhere. I don't know where. You don't want to ever have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
But when you know you're going to a week in the field or you're going to JRTC or NTC, you just got to communicate. So that way your spouse and your kids can understand what the expectations are, know you're coming home. Can I talk to you, yes or no? I find that causes the most friction is when the family member finds out, as a surprise.
Yeah.
You're not a 2-hour recall, mostly, unless you're down in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Yeah.
So it's, just communicate. And the other aspect of it is, I mentioned 6 times no notice. Pain entitlements are huge to soldiers. A lot of hard work was done after that European deployment to make sure that our young soldiers, if you go to CENTCOM, you're going to get hostile fire pay, imminent danger pay, tax-free. But if you went to UCOM, you're on a rotational deployment to Korea, you don't get all that stuff.
Yeah.
You get partial TDY, which isn't a lot. $350 per day per diem is, it's. I would hate as special to look over my wife and say, hey, I'm going to Europe, I'm going to Korea. It's 9 months. I just need you to be really frugal. Don't worry about the fact that you see me eating in a Hungarian restaurant I'm not really having that much fun.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
So I would say the Army, we did a lot of effort that way, and the Army's working on some operational deployment pay. That's going to help because tax-free inclusion doesn't really, it really penalizes some of our population. It doesn't help our young soldiers in the outcome because of their base pay.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're looking at operational deployment pay, and I think that's really going to help offset a lot of these things. And then our garrisons have support activities. We're prioritizing care, additional hours at our child care and other things that we put in place.
All right.
Well,
I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Just one more question,
Yeah.
Sergeant Major. It's interesting you talk about. So we're talking about the families, and we're talking about why that's important. And when you tie that into transformation, one thing I think it's important, we're going to, or in the past couple of years really, with the division as a unit of action and all that transforming and ensuring families understand what's going to change and how that's going to affect their troop. But how important do you think it is to capture those lessons learned as we start incorporating this new, relatively new model?
Well, I mean, it's imperative, right? I mean, it's great to put on a whiteboard like I mentioned or put it in a manual somewhere, but at some point we gotta pull the stain that's behind a wooden stick, and there's a little flag on the end of it. It's called a guidon or a set of colors. It's been, ever since battles, Bull Run or anything else.
Yeah.
The colors have been a call to action that people rally around. So at some point, someone's got to form up around those colors and guidons, and then they're going to have expectation. There are going to be maybe new types of formations. Some things we've been like our, I would tell you our new. Multi-domain task force, and some of these other things our IEW battalions we're standing up. Some of these new capabilities, division engineer battalions again. We played around with division recon. So division recon was important that we piloted that in the 1st Cavalry Division to give the Army feedback on like, hey, is this going to work in large-scale combat operations when it gets near peer threat? I think it's important that we do those types of things and we observe what's going on out there, the realm of relevance. Do we have the right capability, right echelon? Because ultimately, what's the cost if we get it wrong?
Sure.
American lives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. If you're ever looking at something to read, you can either read the Pacific and European trilogies, and you look at the widespread carnage and devastation, both in civilian loss, towns, soldier loss, Nobody wants to go through. We want to be very precise, and we want to preserve our most precious resources, which are America's sons or daughters.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? So it's super important we get this right, because if we get it wrong, there's no take backs then. So I think that's a critical lesson that we have to employ here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before I give you the floor,
Sure.
I just have to ask. So you talked about starting as a private here for what was Bragg, and now you're the FORSCOM Command Sergeant Major. Is that something when Private Holland was sitting in the barracks could have ever imagined?
No. I mentioned before I didn't even make eye contact with my platoon sergeant. What's funny is there's this guy named Andrew McFowler. When I was a young specialist at I'm going to date myself again, the PLDC, which is now our BLC. He was the 18th Airborne Corps Sergeant Major, and he ultimately became the FORSCOM Sergeant Major. So I got plenty of stories about Andrew McFowler. Trust me. I like to jide him all the time because he's still pretty active here in the local community with soldiers and everything else. And what a really a great role model and a mentor throughout. And that's what I kind of strive to be. But I never would have thought that. I was really happy with being a paratrooper and going to Ranger School and coming back and then like, you know what, this is kind of fun. I'm going to go to Italy and try this out too. Yeah. And it just kept going, right? It just kept going. And I would have been perfectly fine with ending my career how I started as a paratrooper inside the 18th Airborne Corps. Yeah. But, call to action. Here I am as the FORSCOM Sergeant Major, and I'm trying to use all of those experiences and those lessons and try to employ them here and just keep learning and keep being a valued member of the team.
Yeah. PLDC on Butner across from the shop at right
The old
there.
wooden
the old
ones, that's
barracks.
right.
Yep. I did that too, PLDC as well.
30 days live-in.
I'm dating myself also. Yeah.
Well, when you said 30 years of service, I was like, shoot, Sergeant Major's only 35. How's that possible?
Yeah.
I like it. I like this.
You're welcome.
Yeah, 35 years old. How'd you do that? Yeah.
So we've covered a ton
Yeah.
over this conversation, but is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make sure we touch on real quick?
Well, I would tell you there's a couple of things that I'm working on, whether it's the Army transition team has asked us to take a hard look at, or the commanders asked me to take a hard look at. And I just want to let soldiers know out there that, because when you think Forces Command as a young paratrooper in 82nd or a young armored crew member out there in the 1st Cavalry Division or up there at JBLM, you don't even, I'm a photo on a wall until you meet me in person.
Right.
When I was a paratrooper in 82nd, I never ran down on this industry. I didn't really know what 18th Airborne Corps, even though that was a board question, right? We do a lot. We do a lot, and it's all starts and ends, like I kind of mentioned, with the requirement and who we most care about. That's our soldiers.
Sure.
So a couple things, training responsibilities. We've been asked to take a hard look at like who's responsible for what, and are we doing too much? If it's not warfighting, then why are we doing it? Right. All this online training that impacts a lot of our soldiers' time, whether it's part of our PME, and then really our Compo 2, Compo 3 brothers and sisters, they don't have hours in their training to actually do this online training.
Sure.
So we're taking a hard look at that. I'm involved in the Barracks Initiatives Group with the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installation, Energy, and Environment. Really about reinvestment in our barracks, some privatization pilots coming up soon. We have not bounded ourselves by any constraints. It's like no idea is a bad idea as long as it makes sense.
Sure.
H2F, super involved with that.
Yeah,
It's not just
Very
your
important.
ACFT score. It's not just your body composition. It's your fitness. It's your nutrition. It's your lethality. It's your cognition. It's your sleep. It's your belief. Even if you don't believe in a higher powering, you believe whatever your belief is yourself, and you're all in. Texas Hold'em, all the chips on the table on you. That's fine. What drives you to serve and be better? The innovation portfolio is huge. We have to change. You're gonna see a lot of things getting delivered commercial off the shelf faster, just so we can start training with things, start employing things, learning things, and sponsorship. If you look at the last CASAL survey, it's like a lot of soldiers like, hey, I don't really feel like I've been integrated and enculturated in my organization. Mm-hmm. Have we done that right? Mm-hmm. And the way how we do things and measure things isn't true sponsorship. It's turning a red or amber chiclet to a green one, right?
Yeah.
We need to take a hard look at like what that actually means to onboard and offboard somebody and their family, right? So that's something that I'm heavily involved with as well.
All right.
Yeah, that's important. Thinking about that, and especially because for some young soldiers, young paratroopers, that's the first interaction with the Army that they'll see.
Yeah.
And so with them and their families,
Take
how
it
do you welcome
serious.
them?
Right? Because when a young paratrooper shows up to Fort Liberty and they go over to the 18th Reception Company, those leaders over at the Reception Company wear the 18th Airborne Corps patch, right? They're representatives of General Donahue and Sergeant Major Barker. That's your first chance to get a first impression. So you mess that up,
Exactly.
you don't get a second chance, right? It's like, I don't know what that was, but I hope the Army experience is a lot better than,
Yeah.
It's really important, especially when you're talking about retention too, and keeping our soldiers.
Absolutely. But I mean, here's the deal, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. The Army's not joining you in your way of life. You're joining the Army. And our goal is to make you a better version of yourself. Be brilliant at the basics. Give you opportunities to succeed, fight, win, survive, and thrive, right? And then communication is important. Give you candid feedback, mentor you, help you grow and be a better person. Build trust. So we help you communicate with your family, and when it's time to go, your family knows who to trust and communicate with when you're doing your job. Because a distracted soldier on the front line can make a mistake that might be costly, and we don't want him or her to do so.
Absolutely. And Dean is probably going to kill me for continuing this conversation. But we talk about possibilities in the Army and the things that the Army can provide to you once you're in. I mean, we've talked to soldiers on the podcast who are in the chorus and have been on America's Got Talent, and I know you're familiar with that.
Sure.
We've talked to an EOD soldier who has been on the Food Network's Chopped. We've talked to a gold medalist. I mean, the possibilities in what you can do and to be able to retain these soldiers who do have this potential, I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, because it brings people from all different facets and unique abilities and capabilities that they add to their teams.
It's just some amazing, amazing soldiers out there.
Yeah.
You know, I'll kind of conclude my comments on this one, and if you guys got any follow-ups, I'm here. Sergeants Major also historians. We preserve the colors and the history that comes with those. Yeah. And since we're here on this installation, I'll talk about the All-American Division. The All-American Division started in World War I, right? They were called All-Americans because that was the first division in our Army at World War I that brought in people from across America to build this division. Not just like your local region, like the 34th in one location, or, you know, it was from across America.
Interesting.
Yes. And in World War II, part of that culture they were trying to build was building up past all the great honor, glory, Medal of Honor recipients. They actually brought people back who were very successful in All-American Division while they were training here nearby before they deployed to England and future on the continent.
Right.
Bringing all that history back to build that culture of what it meant to be the All-Americans, right? So to your point, bringing people from all these different walks of life, all these skills and backgrounds, and pulling them together to build a team, it's not easy.
No.
But when it works,
it works.
That's right.
100%, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for taking time to talk with us. I'm glad we got you on. I think this was a really great conversation. Thank you, Sergeant Major Randolph, for being here again.
No, I appreciate it.
And thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sergeant Major.
All right, finally made it.
Yeah.